Thank you, Mila. So now we're getting into some sort of tougher questions. The first one being, what is the most interesting artifact or document located in the archives, in your opinion?
Yeah, that was pretty hard to narrow down just to just one. So I'm not going to. I'm gonna give you a couple of things. Because I'm a very visual person. I'm very interested in art and things like that. So my favorite things tend to be sort of objecty kind of. But I think probably my favorite thing here is the Strane Perm, which is a huge big piece of silver, which is on permanent display. If you've walked down through the archives corridor, you can see it from the corridor anytime. It's a very beautiful piece. Well, it's beautiful in a Victorian sense. It's not really my sensibility because I'm kind of a minimalist myself, but it's a sort of overblown piece of silver which was given to John Strawn by his students from an earlier gig that he had as a school teacher in Cornwall, Ontario, before he founded Trinity College. So it's just one of those objects that has a certain interest aesthetically, but also has just layers of meaning behind it, right? And Strawn is sort of a controversial figure because a lot of people like to think of him as a progenitor of the residential school system. I'm not so sure. If you judge him by our standards today, he was certainly a racist. By the standards of his time, he was a very generous person to the Indigenous population and tried had friends in the Indigenous population. So it's one of those things that's very difficult. So I guess one of the things I like about the Strane Perm is that it brings out a whole lot of questions, right? It's a neat object in itself. And I don't know if you guys have ever been to the Christmas high table, but Strawn specified in his will when he gave it to Trinity that it be brought out for special occasions and displayed. So we bring it out for the Christmas high table, and the kitchen staff put fruit in his little bowls and things like that, and it's really pretty spectacular. So I guess I love it as an object, and I also love all of the history and the questions that it brings up. It's just a really fascinating object. And then there's some photographs that I really love that are very, very beautiful photographs of the old Trinity College at Trinity Bellwoods Park. You guys you may know that Trinity College used to be there. The college itself is not there. But if you can picture it, if you've ever walked through it, there's what is now the dog park that's sort of sunken down. And that used to have a terrace. The hill by it used to be terraced. And in 1902, for the 50th anniversary of the college, there was a production of Aristophanes' The Frogs. And it was a translation that was done by a classics professor here at Trinity and the students. And it was a production that was, they had very beautiful sets and all kinds of costuming. And an unknown photographer, made incredibly beautiful photographs of that production. And they're just so beautiful. And so I love those. Those are my two favorite things from Trinity College.
Thank you for sharing that. And just building off of my last question, what would you say is the most interesting project that you've worked on as part of your job?
Well, the most interesting project for sure is building this facility. That was it's kind of a dream come true for most people to actually be able to design the space that you work in, right? So that really was that happened sort of 2014 to 2016, and that was really quite exciting and wonderful to be able to, know the college really well. And by that point, and really understand my collection really well, and then help the architect design this space, which works really well. It's quite a wonderful space. So that was a really exciting project, and the kind of thing that most people never get an opportunity to do. So that was great.
Thank you. I'm sure it must have been really fulfilling to see all of it.
Oh, it really was.
That,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. And what aspect of your job do you enjoy the most?
In dealing with the students is really the most important, the most fun thing for me. Trinity students are pretty great. You guys are smart. You're smart and interesting, and you have all kinds of great ideas. And it's just a real pleasure to deal with the students. I love doing, college tours. I'm sort of the go-to person about the history of the college, obviously. So I know a lot about the architecture and what's here and different personalities. And so I love sharing all of that stuff that I know with students. I love introducing students to the whole business of using primary documents in research. The Vic 1 program has an archives class that a lot of Trinity students partake in. And so it's really fun to work with those students really intensely. They always have a project where they choose one archival group of records and build their whole project around that. So that's a lot of fun, sort of delving into things with the individual students. So yeah, that's really the most fun part of my job.
And what, in your opinion, is the most difficult part of your job?
I guess juggling all the different parts, right? It's takes a certain amount of time management skills and that sort of thing. So yeah, because there are a lot of moving parts to it, and a lot of it is unexpected. Things sort of come out of the blue. Like it's classic to have a freedom of information request 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon before a long weekend, and you've got to just drop everything and get on it. So that's the sort of thing that a lot of my job is. It's sort of public service, so a lot of it is out of my control, right? So that, I guess, is just managing all of that sort of stuff is probably the most difficult part. It's all fun. It's just sometimes managing it all is hard.
Right. And you mentioned public service, and we were also talking about the accessibility of the archives. So we were just wondering, what are your thoughts about digitizing the archives, and like, what would such a project look like?
Yeah, it's hard to imagine, but even in a small archives like Trinity, there are probably millions of pages back there. And so when people talk about digitizing it, they don't necessarily understand what that would actually look at. It was a real eye opener. A few years ago, we wrote a grant to see about digitizing one section or series of one of our large, heavily used archival phones. And it was going to cost $80,000 to do that, right? It's very, very labor intensive. It's not like you can just feed most archival documents into a feeder, right? A lot of them are brittle. A lot of them are different kinds of paper they would just get torn, right? So they're originals, and you have to be respectful of the fact that there's only one copy, right? So it turned out like we costed it out very carefully, and it was going to be $80,000 to do, I don't know, maybe 20 boxes of records, and I've got thousands, right? So it's just not practical. So what we do is we do digitize things that are sort of visually important, like the photographs. Most of the photographs are digitized now. I have a number of incredibly beautiful architectural drawings from all the iterations of Trinity College over the years, and those are all digitized now. And then we do digitize on demand, and we keep the things that are digitized and make them accessible to other people, right? For instance, some diaries that I have, somebody paid to have those digitized because they wanted to work on a thesis, a PhD thesis, and now I've been able to share that with other people, like other people who asked about those diaries, and I can do that. There's certain things that we're sort of working on when students were allowed in here. The kids from the review were actually digitizing past issues of the review and putting it on their review site. So we're doing stuff, but it's time consuming. It's very, very slow, and I don't think that digitizing the entire archives is something that will ever happen, to be honest.
Okay, thank you. I've just got one more question before Shruti takes over, and this is kind of a fun one. What is your favorite spot at Trinity College? And feel free to mention the archives as your answer.
Well, the archives, of course, is my very favorite spot, but I think the chapel is, I guess, my second favorite spot. I don't know how many of you go into it. I mean, you don't have to be an Anglican or even religious to go into the chapel. It's just such a beautiful spot. I find it incredibly peaceful to go in there and sit sometimes. But it's also really nice just to go. I think it's going to be open again. The chaplain, Andrea, who's really wonderful. If you haven't met her, she's great. I think she said that they were going to open the chapel again, so you can just sort of walk in. But if you just walk around it, there's some incredibly beautiful things in there. There's some really nice pieces of Canadian art in the chapel that were designed for the chapel, some sort of architectural pieces. There's the beautiful stained glass. Some of the stained glass that's in there is from Old Trinity. If you go out, the entrance that goes out onto Hoskin Avenue, that door is usually open. There's some incredibly beautiful sort of pre-Raphaelite angels in the stained glass windows above the door. There's just beautiful things that are sort of to delight the eye if you're just walking around the chapel. If you go into the Lady Chapel and look up, there's the beautiful coffered ceiling that's in those gorgeous colors. And then there's the sort of the general austerity of it, which I just find really, really, really beautiful and really calming. So on a number of levels, I think the chapel is just spectacular. And if you haven't spent time in there, I'd really encourage you to do so.
Thank you. Yeah, I absolutely agree about the chapel. I've only been once or twice though, unfortunately, but maybe after once they reopen.